Hey, well, what is up, everyone? Welcome to episode number 43 of the Faith and Pop Culture Podcast. It is me, your host, Daniel, and I'm joined, as I always am, by the one gorilla to my 100 men, Mr. Samuel David Kemp. What is up?
Well, I think if I could be any animal, I feel like as a kid I always wanted to be a gorilla.
Well, see,
So
I don't know if gorillas are quite as hairy as you are, but
that's true.
I feel like that is, if you were like an animagus from Harry Potter, I feel like a gorilla would probably be.
I mean, like
I feel
who's
like
all?
I'd be like a ferret or something. That's probably something not exciting and manly like a gorilla.
Yeah,
Um,
like an owl. Owl would be cool too.
hey, I could settle for an owl. We were both
Yeah.
very wise. Have you followed the crazy the debate to end debates, the great question of our times of whether 100 men could in fact win in a battle royale against a gorilla?
Yeah, I a little bit. It's one of those things that is just a little bit odd, but the internet does weird things from time to time, and I feel like this is this is one of those instances where it's like I feel like the curiosity and the technology have converged so that we can now, like, with modeling and AI, like answer some of life's most, uh, challenging questions.
Yeah, the ones that we lay awake at, late at night,
Yeah,
wondering, asking these deep, probing questions. I did want to, believe it or not, I mean, if you don't host a faith and pop culture podcast, if you can't make literally anything somehow connect to faith and pop culture. So
exactly.
I did want to mention sort of this whole viral thing, because I do think it ties into kind of the main stuff that I wanted us to talk about today. And it is like if you're not as like terminally online as someone like I am, and you're not familiar with like the meme, this is sort of this thing that's like all great kind of memes has just like exploded in the last couple of weeks of. I don't even know. I didn't bother to like do the deep dive of like where it started. I wasn't that invested in it, but someone I think probably on TikTok. That's where most of this stuff,
Yeah.
the cesspool of TikTok that generates these sort of things just sort of pose. I mean, like the question has been around forever, like, that debate, but they had just sort of thrown out this question of like, hey, in a fight, who would win? Like, 100 men or a gorilla? And like people have just taken that and just run with it. Like there's, people like all corners of culture are weighing in on this question. Like celebrities are weighing in on this question. Like a bunch of like tech geeks are like coming up with these like like computer simulations and like trying to like run these simulations to actually see who would win. And like I saw just the other day, there was like they went and found some like gorilla expert who's like, this is like their the moment they've been waiting for their whole life. Like they pulled her in for
Yeah.
an interview and like, she's trying to like, to weigh in on like who she thinks would win. And, she's trying to like, talk about gorillas and like, it's like, no one cares. We just want to know like
Yeah.
who would win the fight. And I mean, her consensus or her thing was that the humans would definitely win. Although it seems like most people are on, I don't know what
Team
it says about
gorilla.
like our like our faith in humanity. Most people don't trust the humans to to
Well,
hold their own against
yeah, I mean, you would think that surely that many people would eventually be able to overwhelm a gorilla despite the brute strength of a gorilla. And
yeah. I
it's
mean,
like,
if you watch all these like nature documentaries and like the animals that like are being eaten and they're just sort of give up fight. Like energy is a limited resource, and
right.
I think we could tag team
We
in
certainly have to sacrifice some brave souls in the beginning.
to go the
Like
the
somebody's got to be the
funds to
first
send them
one on the
out, and then
beach. Yeah. So it's like, yeah, but yeah, it's one of those things. It's just funny, like that. This is what the internet is obsessing over. Like, which,
yeah.
again, like, what does that say about the decline of Western
I know
civilization?
you go back like a couple of decades, and it's like the utopia that the technology will lead to, and it's like, well,
Cut to.
actually, we can simulate a fight between a gorilla and 100 men. But I did think I think it's, believe it or not,
Yeah.
it may not
How,
seem like it on
go ahead and tie this into faith
yeah.
and pop culture,
Um,
Daniel, please.
but I do, because I do think in many ways like you can't really understand the current culture without some sort of seeing that through the lens of sort of this like meme culture,
Yeah.
what this and like all everything that implies, like the way we share it, the way we connect to it, the way that that is kind of communicated. Like I feel like sort of that me like we think of memes just as like silly, like little goofy pictures, like minions picture, like and like that's sort of like those are memes. But I feel like just sort of that like there's more to it though. Like this sort of that meme culture, like the way that we sort of communicate, the connection that we have, through some of this sort of like the shorthand, kind of shared cultural connectivity. Like I think it goes a lot deeper than that. And I think, like, because it's been around forever, like, the idea of sort of memes and it actually, little known fact about memes, as a meme expert that I am, the guy that coined the phrase was actually Richard Dawkins, like the outspoken brash atheist. Like, so, blame those atheists. They keep, you know,
Yeah.
he didn't invent the meme, just
It's the term.
the title. And like, because he had a book, The Selfish Gene, back in 1970s. And in the book, he talks about, he says, we need a name for the new replicator, a noun that conveys the idea of a unit of cultural transmission or a unit of imitation. So essentially, like he's saying, we sort of have this, essentially because of technology. We just sort of need, like, it's become so prevalent, though, and the ability to sort of share these, shorthanded things. Like, we need a name for it. And he kind of was connecting it to like a gene, how it sort of spreads and replicates and morphs, and sort of this like small unit of like kind of cultural transmission. And I think like the part of it that I think will tie into what I want us to get into, sort of some other viral stories that happened this week, is sort of the idea that I feel like something like the gorilla versus man thing, like kind of reflects the good and the bad of sort of this meme culture. Like I feel like in one sense it does like give off an impression of like connectivity. I almost see memes as like I've always sort of seen them as like an inside joke that everyone is
Yeah.
like allowed to be a part of. Like it's sort of like you see these references and like instantly, it's spread across the internet. You see people, making jokes about it or like, commenting on it or like references. And like there is sort of this sense that like hey, we're a part of this too. Like we're a part of this global community, and like we all, all around the world, all these different people, famous people, expert, like we all know the reference. Like it does give a sense that we like, which is sort of like the utopia promise from social media is like this is going to connect the world. We're a global community now, and we can all be a part of it. And I feel like memes are like one of the most like explicit like expressions of that of like we sort of know the reference and like you're sort of in on the joke, which makes us feel good. The other side of that is just the question of like how legitimate is that actual sense of belonging. Like like
Mm.
we may be part of a digital community and we're all connected, but like are we like like to what level, like, or is it sort of this like superficial like, is there any real depths to that? Or is it
Yeah.
all sort of like sleight of hand, like a false sense that, hey, we're all connected, but like we don't actually really know anyone. We're sort of isolated within this global community. Like, I don't know. I don't know if you're a big meme guy, but like
I mean, I enjoy a meme as much as the next
you
guy.
you dabble in
I've
memes.
I've never like created my own, I don't think, but the one interesting thing about memes is a lot of like um, the image based ones are they're just like infinitely adaptable to like a given situation. Like the guy sweating and there's like the two buttons,
Oh.
like I think that's one interesting thing about memes is like you can adapt it to almost any like it can be a comment on almost any given situation. So you're just like, oh, what this reminds me of, and like you can just insert whatever labels you want, on a meme, and now that can just be shared again. And so it's this like open, like you said, this open inside joke, um, that does give at least a brief sense of belonging or being part of the in crowd, if you will, without actually like this, because it's not really a sense of community. Like you don't get a not truly, I don't think, a sense of community from like being able to understand and disseminate memes. Like I think it's fun and it's amusing, but like no one who has shared your meme or commented on it is going to be like there for you when you hit rock bottom. You know what I mean? So it's like it's just it's a really weird um I guess artifact of our culture right now is that we can we can so join in the sort of the talk, but it's all quite surface level and it's all, you know, I don't know, rather mundane in some ways. And so it just gives this, I think, false sense of connectedness.
Yeah, it's like a shorthand communication that I can like cross some more barriers and like connect people, but like
Yeah.
it's shorthand. Like it
Yeah.
never it doesn't get you to sort of a deeper level, which I think is interesting in sort of that backdrop with some other stuff going on this week. So maybe put a quick pin in it because we will come back to those gorillas and maybe give a final verdict. But before we get into the main thing, which is some the Mark Zuckerberg making some noise, talking about some technology stuff. I did want to mention one other thing that happened because I think it also in a lot of ways sort of reflects this same like kind of common through line, which is really what I try and do with this like, I think like, as a Christian to be engaged in culture, like there's sort of one aspect of like you react to everything that happens, and I do that too. There's nothing wrong with that, but I feel like it's also helpful to sort of step back and like see the more overarching narratives of like, okay, here's a bunch of things that happened and they seem isolated, but like actually maybe they aren't isolated. Like maybe there's some bigger things that kind of connect them. So one other thing that before we get to the Zuckerberg stuff is there was a new movie that came out last weekend, Thunderbolts with an asterisk, which will make sense to anyone who's seen the movie. The movie has had a name change since it released, with some plot developments in the movie. But it like as a lot of people know, if you've been watching, following my work with the culture stuff, like I just don't care anymore about the MCU. Like I didn't grow up. I don't think you grew up a big comic book guy. Did you like did
No,
you
I never really read comics, but
Yeah, but so I didn't grow up with that. But like, I liked the early stages of the MCU. Like I was all into that, and Endgame and all that kind of stuff.
yeah,
But it gets totally lost me. Like like it really is to the point that like if I wasn't reviewing them, like outside of just sort of like my academic interest and like following the culture, like I wouldn't choose to go to any of these movies. Like I don't watch any of the shows. That's sort of where I drew the line of like I don't care what they're doing anymore. Like the
yeah,
quality is not good. The stretched too thin, and all that kind of stuff. So because of that, I was pleasantly surprised that Thunderbolts is actually a really good movie. And I'm not alone. This is like one of the I haven't checked recently. The last time I saw it was like in the high 90s for critically on Rotten Tomatoes, which I mean these movies have just been getting hammered for a couple of years now of like
yeah,
low 40s 30s, like critical, fans aren't liking them, not making money. This movie is good. I think it's sort of like a back to its roots, like I actually cared about stuff happening, which is
mm,
nice when you're when you're watching a movie. So, I don't. It doesn't necessarily make me feel confident that like the MCU's back, baby. Like I feel like the next movie is probably going to be just more of the stuff that I've come to hate. But at
yeah,
least for one movie, I enjoyed it. So Kritika, you can go check out my like, actual review where I break down the movie and all that kind of stuff. But I feel like the part that for this podcast that I wanted to at least bring it into the conversation is that like there's a lot of reasons I think why it's doing well. Like one is this a good movie, it has a good story, it has good actors and actresses, and it's fun. So like those types of movies often do well. But I feel
yeah,
like part of the reason, because again I've always said like you can't really tell how good a movie is based on like the opening weekend, because no one's seen the movie. So like that tells you how good the marketing is, like how
yeah,
good the trailers are. Like you can really tell, second weekend, like when people have seen it, like is there good word of mouth? Do they want to go back and watch it again? Like that more tells. and again, as of recording, we haven't seen what that second weekend looks like yet, but it seems like there's a lot of buzz and like positive word of mouth that I have seen, and I feel like there's part of that kind of conversation to me. I think is sort of what this movie is about. Like this, even in my own review, that was one of my comments. Like this is an MCU movie that like feels like it's about something other than the MCU. Like other than just sort of setting up this next movie and trying to balance all these stories. Like it felt like it was a movie that actually had like themes and messages and like explored human things that are relatable. And again, I won't get deep dive into the movie here, but essentially, like this is a movie that is just all about people feeling sad and lonely and like socially distant and like longing for a sense of community. Like, you know, all the heroes are like that. Like the central villain is like almost everyone in the movie is like, you know, feels like they're like in the world. They, you know, people know them. You know, they're known, but they just don't have like the sense of like a Florence Pugh, who kind of plays like the main character in it. Uh, Elena from Black Widow, kind of, you know, an assassin. Like you know, like she's just super down in the dumps, and like it's like people know who she is, and she has a job, and like, but it's very like, you know, gives off the vibes of like middle-aged dude stuck in a dead-end job with no family to come home to. Like just sort of
Yeah.
no sense of purpose and like no and like the movie itself, I don't want to spoil the ending for people who haven't like seen it, but really like the takeaway from this movie is like it's not strength and power and like superpowers that wins, because most of the characters don't even have superpowers. Like it is like empathy and love, and like there's some pretty good like visuals of like, you know, the final some of the final moments are just the heroes like coming around and like putting their arm around each other, and you know, and just like being present with one another, and like that's what sort of takes, you know, they're able to sort of overcome the grief and the, you know, the powers and like the obstacles, rather than just like, you know, punching and kicking and shooting and fighting like some beam in the sky alien. Like it is like at its core, I feel like it's a movie that is like about that sort of deeply personal connection, and like the need for it, and like what it looks like when you don't have it, which I just feel like feels so like, I don't know. I think it's touching a nerve, like in a very relatable way to sort of where we are as like a culture today.
Yeah, yeah, it definitely sounds like it's onto something there, and it seems very relevant, I think, to a lot of people, um, living in culture today that like, yeah, like I think most people feel that way. And so I think that's it's just surprising that it's coming from Marvel is you know, it's being so in touch like for so long. I feel like they've been so out of touch with, with themselves and with the audience. And so I don't know that. I mean, I think that's a good turn for Marvel. And it's just I think it's these sort of things I think are the kind of things that even if you're not into Marvel and like I haven't seen the movie and I probably won't until it comes out on streaming, but um it's just these are the times where I think especially as the church, it's good to like sit up and listen and say, okay, so what, this is doing really well. Here are the things that it's touching on. What's our takeaway? What are the people that we connect with? What, is this indicative of what they're going through as well? Are they connecting with this film in a deeper way? Why is that? And, what hope can we offer our community, um, that that this is obviously addressing some of those concerns and needs I think that we're seeing in society right now.
Yeah, because I feel like it does, and I feel like sort of all this culminates in kind of this discussion that's been happening, kind of in response to a podcast that Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook and Meta, you know, uh, his company that he was making about kind of AI and social media. But I think you have these sort of two, you know, like the backdrop of, you have sort of the meme culture where it's like, hey, we're all connected, we're in this global community, like isn't it great? Like, you know, instantly we're all in on the joke, and you know, we're all, you know, together and put our arm in kumbaya, and it's great. And yet I think as reflected in a movie like Thunderbolts, like but like people are like lonelier than ever before. It's like
Yeah.
this like these like parallel tracks, like we're more connected than we've ever been, however you want to frame connection, but like we're also lonelier than we've ever been. Because like there's been a bunch of to run through these real quick, like just like the statistics are sobering for like where,
Yeah.
as far as loneliness. Like I know in 2023, a couple of years ago, like the U.S. Surgeon General like declared loneliness as like a health like epidemic, and like risked it to, or linked it to a bunch of just like health concern like this. It wasn't just like it's bad that people are lonely. Like it's to the point that phrasing it as like an epidemic. There was a study, which is one that Mark Zuckerberg I think was actually referencing in the interview, American Sociological Association, where they revealed that like 30% of U.S. adults report to having 3 or fewer close friends, to which an introvert like me says, people have as many as 3 friends. That's
And yeah,
news to
and the
me.
problem is,
Haven't they heard of dogs? But I digress. But also in the same study, like 1 in 3 Americans say they feel lonely every week. 10% of Americans say they feel lonely every day. And part of that study also like touched on like the role of technology. And it was interesting to me that in some ways, people like pointed towards technology as like in a positive. Like 66% of the people said it helps me form new relationships. 75% said it helps me connect with others more frequently. Although they were like divided on like the quality of the connections, which is again back to this sort of that meme culture thing, where like 54% said like it gives me more connections and those are meaningful connections, where 46% said like they're superficial. There's more, but like it's watered down, it's not quality. And like when given sort of a result, like when asked to like list the things that like where do you feel the most connected, like meaningful connections, like uh Americans ranked family, friends, and neighborhoods as like the top 3, and like online communities and stuff were like at the bottom. Like 3% of people actually saw
yeah,
those as like a place where, and interesting too, from a different study, but I think, and this number is like a year or two old, but I think nearly like 25% of millennials and Gen Z, which are sort of like, you could say like the first like digital natives, like the ones that are grew up the most in a world of sort of this connectivity, are being treated for depression. It's like a quarter of those 2 generations are like, not just feeling depression, but like being actively treated for
yeah,
depression.
like a diagnosis of depression.
Yeah, which is like all of that is bad news. Like all of that is, um, whether you're a Christian or just a human being, like that should be any of that statistics should like make us like, and I think people are like people aren't blind to the fact that people are lonely today. The question is sort
Yeah,
of like, what do we do about that? Uh, and kind of on that note, what do we do about that? Mark Zuckerberg rides in on his white stallion to come to the rescue. So here's sort of
yeah,
where it's just got me thinking. I know it's become sort of a conversation online, but he was doing a podcast appearance. I forget what the podcast was, but sort of a techie kind of geeky podcast, and they're getting into like AI and technology. And Zuckerberg was sharing a bit about how like Meta, which is like the umbrella company for Facebook and Instagram and all that, like how they're actively working to develop AI friends. Like, hey, if people don't have enough friends, like don't worry about it. We can just generate those friends through our algorithm. And he says in the interview, he says, citing that study that I just quoted, says like the average person has about 3 close friends, but has like the desire for about 15 connections. So like way below like the supply is not meeting the demand of like where people, the ideal of, hey, I wish I had this, but I only have a couple kind of good friends. And don't need to get into all of his kind of quotes, but he says, the average person wants more connection than they have. Says there's a lot of concern people raise, like, is this going to replace real world physical in world connections, referring to AI? And my default answer to that is probably not. There are all these things about physical connections when you can have them, but the reality is people just don't have as much connection as they want. They feel more alone a lot of the time than they would like. And then he kind of gets into a little bit of that. That's sort of where I wanted us to dig into a little bit of, because I feel like as a Christian, like sort of this conversation keeps bubbling up in our culture of like people we're connected. There's a lot of conversations about social media, why it's bad and all this kind of stuff, or why it's good. Like, but it's just a part of our life at this point. Like, I don't think that
Yeah.
genie's going back in the bottle. Or, but at the same time, like people are clearly unhappy, to like historic levels of unhappiness. So like, what do we do about that? Because you see, sort of like not that like Mark Zuckerberg, is like the spokesperson for like the human race or anything, but like he's a prominent guy, and I feel like he is speaking on, he represents a very influential, uh, whatever segment of society that thinks like, you know, we can address this by having more of these digital connections and like really leaning into sort of this world of, if you can't have these connections anymore in the real world, like we just need to supplement it with some of these meta approved AI things. So what
Yeah.
do you think about that? Like, what do we like, you know, like, are you excited to populate your friend group with a few more like, you know, AI algorithm driven
Yeah.
personalities?
Yeah, I can't wait. Sign me up for that. Like, what could possibly go wrong? Um, yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot to talk about and to unpack, but um, I think, it's like, well, all this technology, you can argue, is it contributing to this loneliness epidemic? Let's set that aside and say the thing that I think could actually get us out of this is if we just like put more technology in it, and then like we'll eventually like technology our way out of these problems. And I think it's a pretty maybe like maybe it comes from a good place, so I don't want to like impute intentions on anyone who sort of takes these approaches, but it seems a quite hubristic approach to like solving the world's problems. Like, you know what? Like, my company actually has the solution to this, and it's going to be, more like, you liked what we did with Facebook. Well, we're going to turn that up to 11, and you're going to love it. And it's like, well, maybe the reason we're in this place is because of how, not to pick on Facebook, but companies like Facebook have existed, um, really to enable novelty uh, without difficulty or without struggle. And basically, what that means is like you get all the dopamine from this technology because of the feeds, because of TikTok and the reels, and just it automatically you know, gives you new stuff, and it's a bottomless scroll, so like you don't ever get to the bottom of your feed now. So all of these sort of technologies that have been baked in along the way exist to keep you on their platform, and you are the product of the platform. And so pardon me if I don't take Mr. Zuckerberg at face value and be like, oh, he's trying to solve this problem and just be a really great guy. Like, again, I'm sure he is a nice guy, but this is not necessarily the thing that will fix it. Like, I see a lot of problems with introducing AI friends, like not
Well, I
least of
mean,
which, like, what's to keep it from just being this, like, we've been so siloed and all this stuff and online extremism. Well, let's just create friends in our own image and like get no feedback or pushback on our ideas. And it's like, okay, yeah, that could work
yeah,
out
because
great.
that was one of my questions for this is like to what degree can you, like, obviously AI is like the technology is advancing like crazy and it's doing way more
Yeah,
than it ever could, but like where sort of is that ceiling of like it will never be a human. Like you can get close, like in
yeah,
theory, like the idea is that you could get like, like, but I just see like so much of, like algorithm, like we have enough data to say like all these platforms, like they just feed you what you want. Like they know what
yeah,
this is gonna work. Like my feed is filled with European heavy metal bands and power metal, like because it
yeah,
knows like I will stop and look if it, is one of the like it's like, an article is like it's only going to feed you your own political bent because it knows that's what you want. Like so if you sort of take some of that same, mindset to like AI friends, like I feel like part of what makes a friend good is they can say like, "Hey Daniel, you're actually being an idiot right now. Like
Right.
don't do that. Like you are wrong. You are being a big dummy." Like is AI going to do that or is like AI because like it seems like this is sort of they're selling it to like to address like the loneliness of like you can sort of find comfort in these. You can have somebody to talk to when you don't have anyone, and like I get that, and I can see the appeal of that of like, hey, I just need to talk through this with someone. Like I don't have anyone, I can like and I mean, it's easy, like I'm a married, and we're both married, like so like that's sort of what a wife is, like
Yeah.
or a spouse or whatever. Like I have like especially for someone that's like single, and you don't sort of have someone in your house that you can just sort of do that with and like unpack it with. Like I can see the appeal of like I just need to, it doesn't even matter if this is a real person. Like I can just sort of it's almost like journaling with feedback. Like but yeah, I just don't know. Like I can just see that these I don't see these as being necessarily healthy friends. I
Right.
see these as being very much like aimed to just sort of give you what you want, a bunch of sort of like, yes men to
Yeah.
encourage you to find your own happiness and yeah, I'm like you like it's almost like, hey, we've introduced the nuclear bomb and like, now everyone's anxious. So like to sort of address that anxiety, like we just need to have a lot more nuclear bombs everywhere to sort of hold everyone. Every country needs one, and we can all sort of hold like that's sort of what it seems like to me is like we sort of
Yeah.
introduced this thing and there's not really any going back. Like I don't see a world where enough of us to decide like, be gone social media. Let's go back to the days of like I
Yeah.
feel like the genie's out of the bottle and like but is this sort of is the solution like more of it? Like is the solution um just more of this sort of digital or is it just sort of is like the net gain from that just more of sort of that meme culture of like yeah, we're connected. Yeah, we're talking to someone and there's text coming back to like talking to Alexa, or something like yeah, there's
Yeah.
response. But like is that actually addressing that void in a way that like or is that a very superficial band-aid that maybe even makes things worse, like rather than better?
Yeah, I mean, and that's at least my sort of gut instinct is like this is going to only exacerbate the problem while potentially like making Meta a lot more money. If suddenly, their time on the app skyrockets because all of these lonely people have made AI friends and they just want to stay on Meta and talk to their AI friend, and then, they get fed advertisements about whatever. It's like yeah, I don't see that being a net good for society. And I guess that just gets down to the point of so what do you do? And I think, fair play to at least try and solve the problem, I guess. Um, but I think the technologist solution is always going to be more technology. And so, like, you see these guys like Zuckerberg or Mark Andreessen is another one who comes up quite often, or Elon Musk. A lot of times, it's the idea is like, well, if we just need to get more technology sort of in place, and that can solve, like, that'll solve this problem. If we put more AI on it, if we, whatever the problem is, like the root cause is we haven't like thrown enough technology at it yet to solve it. And I just, when if every um if your solution is a hammer, then everything looks like a nail. And so I think there's a bit of that happens when you see folks like Zuckerberg sort of saying, yeah, we have the solution and it's more of our product, So it's like, well, I don't think that is necessarily going to fix it. If anything, I do think it will um, just make the problem worse, or maybe people feel better in the short term about themselves, but in the long term, when you wake up from this, simulated comfort zone, you're going to be in a far worse place. Like, talk about dystopian hellscape, you know, 10 years into it, it's like, okay, or you can try and get out of it now.
Yeah, because
And
that's sort of the because I think even like the church, like as Christians, like I think there is a valid tension of sort of the like meet them where they are mindset of like I think you really saw it with COVID, like with
yeah,
when everything was sort of digital, and then people were like, "Oh, it's kind of nice to be digital because I can like it sort of takes away some of the like like it's streamlined. It makes things more comfortable and easy, and like
yeah,
it demands less of you. I can go to church, but I actually like am doing my chores and eating cereal and not having a shower and checking my phone but like I can kind of check the box and I'm part of a community, but like I don't actually have to like do the things that actually cost me to be part of the community and like sacrifice
yeah,
like and you saw some of that and it seems like a lot of that like I think church attendance is like back to like pre-COVID level like I feel like some of that promise like that you saw after of like digital church is like the future. It seems like at least enough people after a bit of that were like, nah, it's kind of not. Like it's
yeah,
kind of, but I do think there is, and obviously people are always quick to point out like the exceptions of like, well, like, but like this person can't come, and you're saying their experience isn't valid, and like, it's like no, like there's always good parts to it. I just think like that's not like most of the people that were digital after COVID, it was okay to go back to church and they didn't want to. Like, it wasn't because they couldn't. It was
right.
because they just saw that as like, I don't really, it's easier and it's less demanding. And like, but there is sort of that question of like, as the church, I guess we're looking at this sort of loneliness thing and, this digital connections and everyone's online, but no one's happy. And it's like, what is sort of our role in this? I guess Christians, like, should we just sort of meet people where they are? Like the question for me is like, well, in one sense, yeah, like meet, I think Jesus did that. Like he'd go to where the people were,
Yeah,
that's a biblical practice. But like, part of me also wants to ask like but what if where they are is like bad like what if like like if if they have like this void of community and it's you know drowning in all this like digital connections and like maybe they don't need the church to just give them more digital connections like
yeah,
maybe that's maybe we're sort of pulling a Zuckerberg of like okay well we know this is bad but we'll sort of give you our version of it and that will be different and because like the Bible is very like essentially the whole Bible is just about how like we're social people and we need connections. Like we're
yeah,
made in the image of God who is triune and like eternally in relationship. Like, the first Adam, doesn't live very long before he's like, this sucks. And God's like, it's not good for man to be alone. Like we gotta have more people. One
yeah,
person is not good. Like the whole idea of church itself as a community and like the family metaphor that often gets used like I feel like the Bible is very clear that like it acknowledges that void, um, and it gives the answer of like we need connection with God, we need connection with people. That's like the two great commandments. Like, but it's just sort of like how do we meet that need now? And I feel like it's easy for us to sort of criticize like you know what if we just replace your friends with AI people like that's sort of like an easy like oh no that's like like Steven Spielberg's gonna make that movie one day about
yeah,
like but like how are we meeting that? Like, are we almost like doing the same thing in a sense of like we just got to meet them where they are and it's all digital and like, or are we like, adopting some of that posture of like sort of these online communities we're a part of that's reality and we don't really need the physical stuff. We don't need to call up a friend because we saw their news on Facebook and we already know what they're going to say. Like, hey, they had
yeah,
another kid. I saw that. I saw pictures. I don't need to call them. Like, I don't know. Like I feel like it's an easy thing to criticize, but I feel like it's a harder thing to like to step outside of and like offer something different.
yeah. I mean, I think that's for sure the case is that I think we can all agree that, yeah, AI friends is probably not the solution, and like more digital church and, digital life groups or whatever digital things. isn't, I don't think, the solution. And I think partly because we're not ethereal digital beings, like we are given material bodies. And I think when you try and live most of your life online, you end up, missing a huge chunk of communication, like all the nonverbal communication that happens when you're in the room with somebody and you're talking and they're moving and, all the stuff that's happening that's not verbal, that's not in text form, uh, all gets missed. And again, we were created with bodies, and so it's not just like I think there's more to the body than just sort of a housing for our mental capacity or something like that. Like it's not just sort of an unfortunate side effect of how like we need our bodies so that we can think and have a brain and do all this other stuff. It's like, no, there's something more to it than just like, you know, housing a place to hold your thoughts or whatever. Like there's something very, I think, innate in us that is physical, um, that I think is a very important part of community. And so, maybe at the very least, it's just, can you use digital uh, communication to uh, further enable like physical in-person communication and community? And there is such a difference between in-person community and digital community. Like sometimes digital will have to do, but I think if given the option, in-person community is the way to go. I think for so many reasons. Um, but yeah, I mean, I guess I would say that as best you can use the digital to bring people together in real life, IRL, as the kids would say.
Um, yeah, and I feel like it's one of those things that like, you know, like it's one thing to criticize Zuckerberg, but like we don't not there's really no weight to that unless like as people, as the church, like and that's where like actively doing something different.
Yeah.
Like we can say that's bad, but like if we're still just, following our friends through their social media and Instagram posts, like and we're very rarely, actually engaging face to face with someone, like then like we're in that same camp. And I do think, and maybe we can kind of end with this, like I feel like there's the potential for just community to be, really one of, if not like the greatest, like apologetic for Christians. Like, my brother and I, if you're watching the video version of this, like we wrote a book earlier, I guess late last year, Straight to the Heart, kind of like an apologetic book, but like kind of aimed at the heart. And we get into that a bit of like just community, like in a world that where like people are so lonely and like so in need of community, but I can only find it through like a watered down digital kind of world that like maybe kind of puts a band-aid on sometimes, but I guess not a long lasting solution. I
Yeah.
feel like the church has, especially as, and if that, the more and more, the culture goes down that rabbit hole of like an AI friends and stuff, like I feel like the church does have the like the potential, the opportunity to like, hey, we can offer, and like so many other like social institutions, like like the boys and girls clubs or Cub Scouts and all those sort of things that seem to be dying, and like people go to movies alone now, and people go bowling alone, like so many of the things that people don't really hang out at the mall, like all these things that like sort of used to be the staples of where you actually like congregate, like more and more there's people just aren't doing that. Like I feel like the church is one of those like regular parts of society that like is built around community and like physical gathering together and interacting. And like I just feel like as the culture goes one way further down the AI kind of world, digital world, like if the church sort of holds true to what our calling is, like that contrast is going to be more and more stark of like, hey, like there's something nice, and like I've already seen that. Like I know there's people that aren't Christians, but like when they're lonely or like in between relationships or something, like it's like, well, I guess I could go to church. Like that's where the people are. Like
Yeah.
every week there's gonna be people, and you can meet people, and like you know, like there's I might not believe in all this theology stuff yet, but I do believe in that I'm lonely and I want to talk to someone and not just be at home listening to podcasts or something like,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I feel like I'm having voices, but I don't actually have connections. Like, so I do think that like, yes, like to me, all this stuff is bad news. Like the AI world and like all this kind of craziness, like it's all bad. But the glass half full take is like, but it also is an opportunity for the church. Like
Yeah.
or just as Christian, church meaning like the community, not just, our local congregation, like just for Christians to be the ones to like kind of hold true and like continue sort of that more important, sort of deeper connection. But speaking of opportunities and opportunities to give people their deep heart desires and their needs and to fill the void in their empty lives, the final segment of this podcast, we have things we like that you should like too. Well, Samuel, this is your week to
It is.
enlighten the American people and uh, the global community we have here digitally with our podcast. So, what do you want to impart on the people?
Yeah, well, I thought it was I just looked over here on my bookshelf as I was preparing for today, and I think a book that really speaks to a lot of what we talked about today, and it does a really good job of really laying out this problem of communication and technology, and uh, really how it is not good for us. It's a book called Super Bloom by Nicholas Carr, and I would highly recommend anyone to read it if they want to kind of dive into sort of how we ended up where we are now, where we're talking about potentially getting to meet our new AI friends. Um, he does a really good job of laying out the problem. It's a bit light on solutions, which I think is often the case with some of these books, but I think it's really enlightening, just sort of laying out how we ended up where we are today, especially in the area of technology, social media, and I came away thinking like, okay, one, I want to use social media less, but two, also to do a better job of communicating like in person, and and just being more thoughtful in how I communicate to other people and not just sort of this, shorthand and really brief and shallow form of communication that often happens online. So, Super Bloom, Nicholas Carr, check it out.
Yeah, and he wrote, was it called The Shallows? Was that his previous
Yeah,
book?
I think that was his.
Um,
Yeah, I don't think maybe I read that one. If I did, I can't remember.
yeah, I
But
can't
yeah,
remember, but all about like internet. He is one of those guys that is like he's one of the expert, like one of the respected people for.
yeah,
I mean, in some ways, I feel like he was sort of ahead of it, the times for like recognizing sort of the cliff that we were
right.
careening towards and why it was going to be bad. So yeah, I have this book on my nightstand or on my side table, and I've read like the first chapter, and this haven't gone further than that yet.
Yeah,
Not because it wasn't good, more just because I was too busy scrolling through social media and
yeah, exactly.
getting my little my jolts of. But yeah, encourage you guys check that out. Reading is a good thing to do if you need to replace some of that social media stuff with a different activity. Tried and true method
Oh
of
yeah,
books. Uh, they
they
still
never go out of style.
they never go out of style, and neither do does this podcast. Hopefully, so we thank you guys for joining us once again for more conversations on whether we have answers or just questions. Or I just think it's fun. I think it's healthy for Christians to sort of read the the tea leaves a bit of where culture's going and what we're
Yeah,
doing and just sort of making some of those connections between like there's definitely a need out there, and I think we all know that, but I don't know if we always like take it as seriously as we should. That like loneliness is not like just one of the problems that are out. Like it's like might be the problem. Like it is one of the biggest things that we're trying to address.
yeah,
Obviously, spiritual stuff and all that is important, but like a lot of times, like unless you get through that loneliness, like you're not going to be able to get to the spiritual stuff
yeah.
and make those connections. So again, thanks for joining us. Could you guys, make sure you keep doing your exercises and stuff. You never know when you'll be pitted against one of the 100 representatives of the human race that may have to take on a gorilla. So stay healthy, go for walks, all those things. And until next time, we will see you next Thursday for more conversations on faith and pop culture.